arguably it's one of the big parts of bringing titles to market as an unknown team, and we've sort of not talked about the money part much, but it's sort of an impossible obstacle to overcome. Uh, the money part to me, and I don't know if we want to talk about that, but I think it's something that's super important.
Why don't we have discuss that part, because I think it's good to kind of have that aspect of it, and then we can probably wrap up after that.
Sure. All right. So the money part, and I'm not inventing anything. I think there's the science to that has been spoken by a lot of wise guys before me, but I think there's a way of framing that information that I think is very important. I'm going to use the word of Jason De La Roca from Montreal, and say that a lot of indie publishers, indie developers rather, come into this thinking like they're going to get the bag of money. Like they have an idea, they're going to get the bag of money, and then they're going to make the game. And they feel like this is the normal way of doing things, and it's really, really not. This is not how it works at all. First, money is not just the one bag of money. The money is an incremental tool. It's something that you need to further your cause and then get some and then come back again once you have more. That's why I was talking about fast iteration. We're starting with a game jam, for example, because it's going to build a narrative of my studio can deliver this, my studio can do this and that, and eventually it will help you pave the way towards additional levels of funding. And I don't think we have time necessarily to go into all of the different forms of funding necessarily.
Right.
There's a lot of talks on that which are super relevant. But I think it's very important to think of it as an incremental tool. Because one of probably the most recurring thing that I hear in my consulting gig is, so we have this prototype, which is really just a prototype, and we need funding. And they're pitching me an impossible problem to resolve because there have been no thought as to how they were going to build a narrative towards the point where they need the money. And they can't pitch an opportunity because all they have right now is a problem. They're at a point where we're out of money, and if we want to pursue that game, we need more. And right now, there's nothing to show where a publisher would look like this, for example, and say, you know what, I'm going to give you said money. And I think that's why I try, and as a consultant, that's why I try to come in as early as possible before this mistake has been made. By the time you no longer have money or time to deliver on the first version that you want to show to, say, publishers, because that's a very good, one of the many good solutions to look at. If it's too late, it's too late, and there's not much I can do to help you. And regretfully, I probably need just to say, you know what, I don't think I can help you. But if you reach out to me much earlier in the process and you still have some resources to go on, my role, I guess, is to try to multiply these resources so that whatever you spend is going to be directly allocated to something that can then be leveraged to generate more money. And that can go through different ways, right? But it's the mindset that you need to have, I think, when you're building that first title, and probably even beyond that. But very critical during the first title, because you're not going with the original money that you're going to pour in unless you're super lucky. You're not going to be in a position where you can deliver on the market and then make money. Like, that's not how it typically works. So it's about making sure that whatever money you invest in the project is invested in such a way that it's going to matter. When we're talking about publishers specifically, I would say that the best approach to doing that, if you're directly looking at a publisher, which is probably not the wisest thing, but let's presume, it's probably to demonstrate intent, is how I would put it. It's not so much about building the systems. It's about putting their a 10, 15 minutes demo in their hands that plays exactly how the final game should, regardless of how it looks under the hood. And once they know that this is the vision, and they know that they can trust you that you can realize that vision, then you're a much better spot to have these discussions. Like I said, I would probably not start by looking for publishers, because most people's, capacity to self-fund development probably doesn't bring them close enough to what publishers would be expecting. But, there's a number of ways you can amplify your efforts instead of just looking at it such as, proper development. And for people from the industry, this is actually probably a bigger challenge, because people in the industry will have developed game from start to finish a certain way, which is optimal for development purposes. And developing a game with the foreknowledge that you're going to look for money with it is a very, very different process. And I think it's very important that to bear that in mind, because it puts, I would say, in that sense, seasoned developers at a disadvantage compared to fresh people just coming out from this industry and just coming in and saying, I'm going to make a game. Because there's a natural understanding that you want to show as much value as possible, whereas if you're just developing the game, you want to develop the systems first. Yeah. So that's the short version, I guess.
Awesome. No, but still really helpful, I think, to just really have that mindset in place, because, like you said, depending on where you're coming from, that can really differ for you. And understanding these things is going to be help shape that mindset in terms of guiding you, along that journey and such. So that's great. Well, we're definitely getting a little close on time here, but before we wrap up, I would love for you to, because we really discussed a lot here, and I would love for you to provide, let's say, like a few key points that you could share with our listeners when they're in their early stages of the game, and kind of the things we talked about. Like, what are some key points that they can focus on and remember as they continue on their journey, especially in their early stages of development?
What do you mean? How early in the process are we talking?
I would say, like, in most cases, like where you would usually find it ideal to come in to help out a developer or whatever. But I would say, like, just fairly early development. Maybe they're working right up towards their vertical slice might be a good place.
Okay, that's actually kind of late, I would say, compared to what I would prefer.
Okay, so
vertical slice to me is like maybe a third or fourth milestone, even in terms of importance. There's a lot that needs to happen beforehand. Typically, I even try to jump in at the conceptual stage if I can.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Hard, but,
so so like key points from there, people starting out, or even if they are a little bit further than that, just a few little bits of advice that you could give.
That's a tough one because it's so abstract. Like right. I said, this is always like case by case basis. Probably the most recurring thing is the one I mentioned is like the strategy to find funding.
Okay.
It's all about how can you leverage the friend, family, and fools, the 3F as we call them. It's like when you have virtually nothing on the table, how can you generate capital to get started with, and how can that really bring you to the next stage, and so on and so forth. Like it's always very case by case basis, but it's probably the most critical point. If you're just going to start by developing your own game from the get go with very limited means, the odds are against you, I guess. But there's always certain things in your context that you can be leveraged in one way or the other. So I can't say that I can provide universal advice on that, but that's certainly a thing you should focus on. And sometimes it requires thinking creatively about how you can leverage the resources you have. Okay. And resources are not just money. I've seen one of the things, for example, that I did, which I think was great, is barter. I'm going to make that game for you at a discount because you're going to provide me a website or something. Not necessarily the best example, but the type of barter you can make between different projects. If you're going to partner up with other teams and so on and so forth, there's a lot that can be made. So if you're going to partner up with somebody, I have my own game that I want to make, and you have your own game, and I'm a programmer, you're an artist. How can we barter a bit? It's not so much rev share. It's more like, oh, you're going to contribute to my game, I'm going to contribute to your game, but there's still, we still own each other. We own our own IP and not the other person's IP. So it's probably one of the big ones very early on. I would say also, not focus so much on the story and the moment-to-moment gameplay in terms of, we're going to go there and then we're going to do this and that and this, and focus really very hard on the 5, 10, 15 minutes of gameplay that you want to showcase at first that are going to act as an example from which you can extrapolate the whole game. This is how I want to feel in the first 5, 10 minutes of the game. And maybe it's a moment from later in the game, doesn't matter. You just, one of the exercises that I have a lot of people go through is, here are 3 blank pages. You're going to write down as like a journal, you played a game today, and you're going to, in the first person, you're going to explain how you felt, what you did. You know, so instead of telling me I pressed right on the controller and it started to move in a nice flash thing, is like it's more about your expectations as a player and so on and so forth. So it's a very first person account of the finished game that has yet to be made, and it allows external parties and yourself included to really start understanding what is the core of that game. And it's very helpful when you're trying to hone, you know, onto the things that you want to show a publisher, for example, because now you know that moment that you need to create for them to understand what the game is about. And so it's much better process, I think, than writing a full GDD or going and saying, you know, we're making an action RPG that's going to be like this game and this game, which doesn't really tell everybody a whole lot of things, because it tells them what it's like, but it doesn't tell them what it's not like. So it's better probably to just start and say, I'm going to explain it in like 3 pages long at the most, how it felt the first 5-10 minute session and why I want to come back to it and what was amazing about it. It's one of these exercises that I think really helps just to externalize the idea in a different way than just trying to build I never recommend people to make GDDs. I don't like them. I think most people are going to try to conform to a template. And I think that this is a clear misunderstanding of what the GDD should be. The form and format should be hand in hand. And so if you pick a format that's already been pre-established for a certain particular game, and you try to shoehorn your ideas in there because you're not, you know, masterful with the use of a GDD, most likely the GDD is going to work against you in trying to document certain things. Sorry. So I would probably, if it's your first game, I would probably not use a GDD until you see the need for it. And there's a lot of schools of thoughts on using one pagers or Confluence or stuff like that anyway. So GDD is no longer like that.
Yeah,
that thing everybody uses.
No, but I really like the last the one prior to just talking about the GDDs though is
3-page one.
Yeah,
it's ironically called the one pager, but it's like 3 pages. But yeah,
no, but I love that idea because I know how important it is to express that narrative, but in like the story, I mean, but still, I think the next level up from that, which you just explained, is how do people feel and what's that feeling you convey? Because let's face it, when we play games, like when we think back to like those retro games that my pretend, you know, game studio is talking about, I'm trying to kind of relive that and hope that other people can have that same experience. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is show like what do you feel or how do I express this feeling and stuff, and focusing on that, I think at the core and the essence of the game is really going to be I just think that overall advice that you provided there was very beneficial.
I think a lot of people might disagree, but the way I would summarize it is it's not about the game's story. It's about your experience, so your story of the game, essentially. So this is what you need to explain is how the person feels about the game and not what the story of the game was. And it's a very different way of looking at things. And I think it really helped people crystallize the difference between this is not a book. This is an interactive experience that somebody is going to play with, and they're going to experience ups and downs in a very different way than other mediums and media. So I feel like this is one way to really crystallize it, because I feel like if I'm going to take most of the GDDs I'm ended over, it starts with that 8 pages long story about the game, which at that point I couldn't care less about because I don't understand the game. I don't understand why it's cool. I don't understand how I'm going to feel about it and how it's delivered. So in essence, that storyline so far is wasted. Doesn't mean it's not good. It's just completely wasted on the fact that I have no idea how it's going to be communicated to me and why I would care about it. And so I would much rather you explain to me why it was fun, that I had to double click that button and then fell down and then that somehow tied me into understanding the core mechanic. Sorry about that. Yep. So that's where it comes from.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for providing those points and further elaborating on that. And like I said, I think that point was awesome. Now, but before we go, I again just wanted to thank you for joining joining us and being on the podcast. It's been great. But I do want to know What is the best way that if people are interested in getting some consulting with their game process and everything, and especially in the early stages, what's a great way for them to reach out to you or talk with you?
Most reliable is using my email, which I don't know if you can leave on the website or something.
Yep.